Commencing countdown.
3, 2, 1.
This is the Contracting Experience, connecting government contracting professionals to the world around them through conversations with acquisition influencers, insights into evolving hot topics, and sharing lessons learned from the field.
This podcast episode and the mention or appearance of external links does not constitute or imply official endorsement on behalf of the U.S. Department of the Air Force or Department of Defense. The Department of the Air Force does not endorse any non-federal entities, companies, products, or services. Moreover, the Department of the Air Force does not exercise any responsibility or oversight of the content at external link destinations mentioned during this podcast. The views expressed within this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Department of the Air Force, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Welcome, podcast listeners. On this episode of The Contracting Experience, we sit down with Mr. Tim Greeff, the president and founder of National Security Technology Accelerator, or NSTXL. Tim is joined with Matt Summers, who's an Agreements and Contracting Officer at the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane Division. NSTXL partners with Navy Crane to manage their Strategic and Spectrum Missions Advanced Resilient Trusted Systems, or SMARTS program. SMARTS is the DoD's premier rapid OT contracting vehicle for flexible acquisition in trusted microelectronics, strategic and spectrum missions, and other critical mission areas. Tim and Matt join us today to talk about the history and future of Other Transaction Authority as a procurement mechanism and as a unique partnership it creates between government and industry in driving innovation. Welcome, Tim and Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rob. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, you betcha. Glad you could both join us. So, Tim, let's start off with you. So you've been involved with this OTA journey since the early days. Can you maybe walk us through, in your mind, what you've seen as the evolution of Other Transaction Authority and maybe some initial challenges you had to overcome?
Certainly. Yeah, so I've been involved in OTAs for well over a decade now, and even though this is an authority that has been around since the late 1950s, it really wasn't adopted on a large scale by Department of Defense until this century. And the consortium model that we're a part of, which are externally managed OTAs, based around solving problem sets with non-traditional defense contractors, largely small, innovative companies, that didn't really pick up until about 15 years ago. And that's largely been the predominant growth. What we really faced early on was developing a level of trust between these emerging startup companies and small businesses and the federal government from a standpoint of really doing business together. Because these, as technologies have become more complicated and the threat space has become a lot more complicated, the need for integrated solutions has created a real need for not only teaming on behalf of companies, universities, outside of DoD, but also like a really good collaboration, public-private partnerships between the program offices, the Department of Defense, the contracting offices that support them, and all of the innovators outside. And when you're trying to move quickly, which OTAs allowed you to do, it's often very easy to become focused just on the speed aspect, but we're big believers that speed is just an outcome of process. And so the real challenge with OTAs was to utilize the flexibility to be able to move at the speed of business to deliver solutions to the warfighter while still doing what you need to do from a standpoint of government and contracting to ensure that these are open and fair competitions and that everything is transparent. And so really creating an environment that is conducive to teaming, to open competition, and to helping the government cast a broad net while moving at the speed of business has been the number one challenge in the growth of OTs, because we've seen the sort of average size and complexity of the projects increase at a very steep rate over the last 10 years. And so a lot of what we've worked on and pioneered with Crane and with, specifically Matt, who's on the call here, has been around how do we utilize this longstanding authority to adapt to the challenges of just rapidly scaling innovation and the rapidly more complex, increasingly complex threat space.
All right. Excellent, Tim. Yeah, thanks for that rundown and brief history on the OTs. So, Matt, following up on what Tim just shared, from your perspective as an agreements officer, contracting officer at Crane, as well as the business partner in this agreement, what are the essential elements of a successful public-private partnership in the context of an OT like SMARTS? Where do you see the biggest challenges in bridging the gap between government and industry needs?
Thanks, Rob. Before I answer that, let me just, I'm going to give a brief introduction of myself and also some context for your listeners in terms of what Crane does and where we exist within the Department of the Navy. As you've already explained in the intro, I'm an agreements and contracting officer at the Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane Division. So Crane is one of 10 warfare centers that is organized to the Naval Sea Systems Command. That is our headquarters in Washington, D.C. We're the third largest naval installation in the world and happen to be right here, located in the heart of the Midwest. But we are one of 10 warfare centers, and we have 3 technical focus areas, and those are strategic missions, spectrum missions, and expeditionary missions. So the majority of my workload portfolio these days is made up of OT actions, and specifically to date, it's been those using the prototype authority under 10 USC 4022. So you've already kind of provided the context, and Tim, that we're talking today about NSTXL, the National Security Technology Accelerator, in their capacity, like supporting us under what we call one of our OT agreements here at Crane, that's called the Strategic and Spectrum Missions Advanced Resilient Trusted Systems. And so we just shorten that to SMARTS. But again, so that agreement has a scope that covers those first 2 technology areas that I told you about, strategic and spectrum missions. And you can, if your listeners want to learn more about the SMARTS OT, they can go to smarts.org. The term that we've given it, SMARTS, it not only refers to the agreement, but also the ecosystem that's been created by NSTXL. And I'm super proud. I'm going to toot the horn for Tim a little bit. And I hope I don't steal your thunder, Tim, but NSTXL now has almost 1,000 members within the consortium. To date, I believe the exact number is 983, 89% of which are non-traditional defense contractors. So I'm super happy with what they've been able to achieve. Those are some awesome numbers. I mean, one of the big objectives of the OTA is to get to those non-traditional defense contractors. And they have created an ecosystem that has a large majority of those. To date, my portfolio has only included prototyping OTs. And because we're talking about, because we're with the founder of NSTXL, and because happens to be the customer set I'm aligned with, from here forward, I'm just going to be talking about NSTXL. So 10 USC 4022, first I'll say, is rife with nuance. And growing up in the FAR-based world of procurement, that appeals to me. I like to parse the terminology, if you will, and it's fun for me. But So there, first of all, we have to, for any new project, we have to determine how, if it fits the definition of a prototype, and what is our appropriate use of the authority for any given project. And there's four things we have to consider. And those are at least one non-traditional defense contractor or nonprofit research institution participating to a significant extent. All significant participants in the transaction other than the federal government are small businesses or non-traditional defense contractors, or at least a third of the total cost of the project is to be paid for by sources other than the federal government. So those three are all the appropriate mechanisms for industry to meet, so that for appropriate use of the authority. But then the fourth one is the one that the government itself can fulfill, and that is the senior procurement executive for the agency determines in writing that exceptional circumstances justify the use of another transaction. So really, I said there are four mechanisms by which we can appropriately use the authority, three of which can be met by industry, one by government. So this agreement that we have with NSTXL is, or any consortium management firm for that matter, is really entering into agreement we've essentially hired NSTXL to be our agent or our broker, if you will. I use that terminology often. NSTXL is our broker. Essentially, they're an intermediary who facilitates transactions on our behalf. And the key things that make this particular relationship successful is, first and foremost, collaboration. It's the bedrock upon which we achieve success, I will say. The goal of it is to leverage the strength of both entities, that is Crane and NSTXL. And I will say NSTXL has been able to release solicitations and requests for information and things like that for us on platforms that we have never thought of using within the government, like LinkedIn, or posting things on web-based forums. We have regularly engaged with industry live and offered Q&A to them in web-hosted events. I participated in one myself that had over 1,000 participants. So they've done an excellent job for us marketing opportunities that we're releasing to industry, and leading to, all of this is leading to improved efficiency, cost effectiveness, and innovation. Innovation, I will say, can be achieved on both sides of the agreement, okay? We can achieve innovation in our business practices that we're using to award these projects. To Tim's point earlier, I love the point that he made about speed and it being an outcome of a business process. So the same way that a performer under an agreement is prototyping hardware or a business model themselves and achieving some innovation in that, we can do the same on our side of the agreement, the government that is, and NSTXL, to come up with new business processes of our own, new ways of soliciting requirements, new ways of evaluating proposals, new ways of engaging with industry. There's so many things, so many opportunities for us to be creative on our side of the agreement as well. So I'm super excited about that. So, all right, number one, collaboration is key. Number two, well-defined objectives in the agreement. So again, it's critical to public-private partnership to have well-defined project objectives, and that they are clearly stated, and just as importantly, that they are measurable to ensure effective performance and monitoring and accountability. All right. Third, transparent procurement process. carrying out projects under the OTA. So make sure that we're interpreting things consistently and that we have agreement amongst all of our agreements officers in the department on how we interpret and carry out our processes and procedures. It, in a way, it gives us creative license to do what makes sense for any individual project, and I'm super excited about that. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, appreciate the context, kind of level setting everything and, kind of going through some of the aspects of the OTA and the difference between, the FAR-based contracts you mentioned and this kind of new world of OTs. And so getting over to Tim, Matt kind of level set things with OTs and introduced this whole consortium aspect, right? Consortium contracting, as Matt pointed out, nearly 1,000 members on that team, with almost 90% of them non-traditional contractors. So my question for you, Tim, how does NSTXL actively recruit and retain innovative companies, particularly those that might not have traditionally worked with the DoD? How do we get them to participate in SMARTS? And then two key questions our industry partners might want to know about: what incentives are offered to encourage their participation? And even more importantly than that, how do we handle intellectual property from those companies?
All good questions. And a key aspect of our membership is we make sure that it is dynamic, that we're constantly renewing, we're constantly refreshing, but we're constantly engaging, because it is our responsibility in the role that we play not only to ensure that we're providing opportunities for our membership, but conversely, to ensure that we're making our members, particularly those that have never done business with the federal government before, we need to make them ready to be good contractors and good support for the government program offices that are depending upon them to deliver these technologies to the warfighter. Because doing business with the government is different than doing more of a business-to-business, a B2B platform. And there are just things that are unique about particularly the Department of Defense and their mission needs, where mil-spec is a specific thing that you're not going to necessarily see in the commercial marketplace. But as the Department of Defense increasingly is looking for dual-use technologies that have an application in the commercial space as well, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that whatever part of that technology that is applied to the solution for the warfighter is effectively delivered, and that the companies that are working and supporting the warfighter know what the demands are, because there's a mission element of this that you're just not always going to find something similar in the commercial space. One thing that's unique to NSTXL is we've never believed in high barriers to entry. So, a lot of consortia will make you sort of join before you can even see what the opportunities are. We don't do that. We post all of our opportunities unless there's a security restriction on them. We post them all publicly for companies to see and read fully to determine whether or not there are any opportunities that are worth their time and investment. Because what the government oftentimes doesn't understand about the startup is that it's not necessarily the money. For particularly small pre-revenue companies, time is their most valuable resource. And so feeling like they're wasting their time and they have 10 different places where they need to go for business opportunity to make the government opportunity one they need to go after, we need to make sure that they think it's worth their time to compete for it. They're used to being told no. Any entrepreneur worth their salt is not afraid of competing and losing. What they are afraid of doing is wasting their time, spinning their wheels, and pursuing opportunities that don't lead anywhere. So that's something we want to make sure that we do as we work with these. Another way that we gather is through some of the more creative ways we've set up the OTAs. And then again, as Matt mentioned, networks like LinkedIn and other online platforms, we constantly utilize those, because we want to make sure that we're going and finding the best tech wherever it exists at any given point in time. So we never rest on our laurels of just, what is our membership today? We're always looking to kind of expand that. As far as the second part of the question, which is what incentives do we provide? As I mentioned before, it's really about how do we create a better business partnership and working relationship between the government and these companies on the outside. And the sort of fundamental criteria and thematic goal that we go for is alignment of incentives. One of the trickiest things about acquisition, and where OTAs are particularly useful, is that when you look across the entire life cycle of an acquisition, oftentimes there is no alignment of either chains of command or incentives from, the end user warfighter to the program office that's required to find the technology, to the legal and the contracting offices that are responsible for making sure that these are done appropriately and above board, and then to those the industry that's competing for these awards. And so what we try to do is make sure that there's an alignment of these incentives, and that's part of our business model, where we do all this outreach, and everything that we NSTXL do on the front end is at 100% cost risk to us. We don't get paid a dime for anything we do on the front end to manage all these consortia. We only ever recoup our costs when we deliver a solution to the government that the government proactively chooses and accepts. And why that's important, it means that we are fully aligned with our membership, that while we don't have any say in who the government chooses, we just need to make sure that they choose someone. So our incentive is always on find as many qualified solutions, be it teamed, fully integrated, or sole solutions that we can to put in front of the government so that we ensure that something gets chosen. And that's why we reach so far and wide. That's the driving motivation. So this alignment of incentives is something that you're not going to find everywhere in government acquisition, but you will absolutely find in the OT space. As far as IP, because that is a very high concern, particularly for smaller companies and startups, where oftentimes their equity is entirely tied up in their IP. So they should be very concerned about that. OTs, and Matt can chime in here as well because he's the technical expert here, but OTAs are very flexible from an intellectual property standpoint, and allows the government and the selected contractor, the selected performer, to negotiate those terms on a project by project basis, which is really important because any given company is going to have a different level of expectation. Any technology is going to have a different level of the importance of the IP to that company, to the project. And so you usually start with general purpose rights, and then you kind of work from there. And it allows for a real conversation between the government and the selected performer to ensure that both parties feel like they're getting what they need to. And that's a fundamental part of creating a valuable and trusted relationship to ensure that these prototypes are delivered on time and that both parties feel like their interests are being represented and they're getting the value out of the project that they were seeking in the first place.
All right. Yeah. Excellent stuff, Tim. Yeah. Several examples there. Almost seems too good to be true. So let me go back to Matt for a minute, right? You've got Tim and NSTXL. They've got their team established, nearly 1,000 companies. They kind of send out the requirement, they kind of vet and put things together for the government. So what might be some misperceptions from the government side with regard to OTs, right? If folks hear about this, they say, hey, this consortium contracting, it almost sounds too good to be true. What might be some government misperceptions out there? Do you have any of those?
I have them in spades, Rob. Regulations are there to guide my decision making for me, essentially. As I said earlier, if this, then that, and we get super comfortable with those. Us bureaucrats doing government contracting, right? But we have to remember that we're in Title 10 that gives the armed services the authority to operate. We're no longer in Title 41, that is of the U.S. Code, where federal procurement policy resides, okay, in Title 41. And that federal procurement policy is the basis for FAR and DFARs, et cetera, all the regulations that tell me how to implement and carry out statutory law. Under Title 10, I don't have any of that. So when someone says, oh, this sounds too good to be true, I'm like, well, it kind of is. This, I've heard it said before. I've even read it, that this is a statutory gift to folks like myself. But to Tim's point earlier, relating to government purpose rights, for example, okay, if we agree to government purpose rights, I'm going to incorporate the applicable clauses into my contract in the FAR-based world. But in the world of OT, the prospective performer and I can tailor language together, right? To come up with terms and conditions we can both live with. We're not dictated by a mandatory clause, for example. I mean, that's just one example, but as I said, we get comfortable with the FAR because it dictates what we do day to day and how we carry out things. But I do have to work very closely with my legal counsel here at Crane. The particular gentleman that I work with is Mr. Tom Morrissey. I want to give a shout out. I don't want to forget Mr. Morrissey. He's been a wealth of knowledge for me and super helpful, because when I came to OTs from FAR-based contracting, I really had to go back to basics. I really did. But in working so closely with my legal counsel, Mr. Morrissey, and working very closely with the team at NSTXL, who had the experience with putting agreements like this in place with their membership, it really made it, my learning curve wasn't so steep. In other words, I surrounded myself with folks who really knew what they were doing, and I could take my guidance from them until I got my legs under me, as it were. I think Tim sold himself, he and his team, short, and the experience and the expertise that they bring. It's not only been helpful for folks like myself, but for their consortium members, I'm sure, working with them as a mentor, as much as anything else, has been super helpful for them. So, you know, I lean on NSTXL to interact and facilitate interactions between me as the government representative and and our performers under any of our prototype projects, and I utilize their expertise and their services. I lean on NSTXL to facilitate the interactions, be it like a web hosted event, or even when they set up some conference events for us in person. We under the Microelectronics Commons project that Tim mentioned earlier. I hope to get into that a little bit more. That's a massive, $2 billion prototype project that I oversee as the agreements officer. But as part of that program, we have hosted now multiple in-person events that have had over 1,000 in attendance. And so NSTXL has facilitated that, and we've had industry and high-level government leadership, including some Senate representation there, high-level DoD leadership, and we've played host to all those folks in those events. So it's just been great to get the word out there, the good news story, if you will, of the OTA out there in front of our DoD counterparts, saying, look, SMARTS is an example of what the OTA can be. And to your point earlier, it's about the process that we've established here. So reducing barriers to entry, as Tim said earlier, the marketing opportunities that NSTXL utilizes. I mean, they're utilizing Facebook, LinkedIn, all kinds of social media platforms that we would have never thought to use before. And I'm looking forward to using, to expanding on those as we move forward. I mean, NSTXL and me and my government counterparts were always talking about new ways to utilize, to come up with a new business process. Hey, for example, let's talk about verbal pitches of proposals. Let's talk about offering industry, maybe they can record a video of a technology demonstration for us and that we could have sponsors potentially go out there into a library of video clips so that folks can understand what is out there in the industry, what really is the state of the art that we're not aware of, right? So there's so many things that we could do that keeps me excited about it. But in terms of streamlining the process for industry, I mean, I can't say enough about the concept of advanced payments that our SMARTS base agreement affords the performers under SMARTS. And so the consortium management firm, NSTXL, they can advance bill the government, okay, against dollars obligated under the agreement that we have in Crane with NSTXL. They can go ahead and bill against those dollars obligated so that they have them sitting in an account so that, say, a non-traditional defense contractor who, let's say, may be sensitive to cash flow concerns, so they are ready to, once a government representative has accepted a deliverable under a prototype project, that outlay has already happened to NSTXL, and NSTXL is then waiting for our concurrence to make that outlay to the project performer. And that is one of the ways that we've achieved a massive efficiency and lead time to make sure that our performers are getting paid timely. So I know that's been an important aspect of the model for the performers under the OT, the SMARTS OT. We also have another concept within the SMARTS ecosystem, a term that we call the parking lot. That is where so when we solicit and get, say we get 10 responses to a solicitation, we make one award. Now, my sponsor could say, I can only fund the one right now, but I want to retain these other two for if I can get some additional funding, I'm going to make awards to those companies as well. And so NSTXL retains those other alternative solutions, and when funds become available, then we can just pull them out of the parking lot, out of this repository that NSTXL maintains, without starting a procurement process from scratch, right? And going through a planning phase, a solicitation phase, evaluation, whatnot. We start from, hey, we've already gotten the proposal, the evaluation is completed, and the selection official has already told us this is their desire to do this. So once those funds are identified, we can simply initiate the engagement with that prospective performer and proceed to award. So again, this is just one of the ways that we take advantage of the OTA, but there are so many others I'm super excited about. Over.
All right. Excellent, Matt. Yeah, thanks for that rundown. Again, several advantages in this whole OTA world. Tim, Matt talked about a lot of successes, a lot of benefits. Have you seen from NSTXL, this whole consortium thing? Surely you've had some lessons learned, some bumps in the road along the way. Can you share any of those and how we've overcome those?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to our very, very first contract that we managed all the way back in 2014, 2015, we noticed that even then, a lot of the OTA process was very influenced by FAR process. And, again, the FAR has its role, and there's certainly a lot of strengths to it. And then you've got the checks and balances. And I think over the years, as we've added more and more layers to existing policies, you start to kind of get that gridlock. And so if you're applying all of that gridlock to an OTA, it's not going to be any more effective than any other vehicle. It's the ability to lean in and utilize that flexibility. So one of the earliest innovations that NSTXL brought to the table and it's something that has been within the SMARTS OTA since day one, is the way in which we go about approving a project. So what we learned from the very first OTA that we ran, which was, at the time, was the OTAs used to kind of be in these 3-year, $100 million ceiling packages, and then they just sort of terminated when they were done. This was one of those variety OTAs. Now they're sort of much longer with much higher or no ceilings. But in this sort of older school OTA, we used to go through the process, and by the time we got through the competitive process and went through all the paperwork, if there were any terms or conditions at the highest level of the contracting office we're not comfortable with, or the legal department, they didn't see that until kind of the end of the process. So we were already 2 to 3 months into the process, and then they'd get eyes on and say, well, wait a second, that's not quite right. And then they would kick it back down, which added just a lot of delay. And we realized pretty quickly that they had a point. It wasn't that anyone was right or wrong necessarily. It was that we weren't engaging the right approval mechanisms at the appropriate point in the process to maximize efficiency. So what we did is flip the model on its head, and we worked with our partners in the contracting and legal offices and the program offices to front load all of these key decision points that we found were slowing things down on the back end, to ensure that we had checked those boxes, crossed the T's and dotted the I's, before we ever went out for competition, before we ever asked a company to engage, before we ever asked anyone to put pen to paper on a proposal. We had approval that, yes, if you meet these conditions and your acquisition strategy is executed like this, then yes, it will be approved. And so we had clear, transparent expectations set out for and by the program office, the contracting office, the legal office, and the consortium manager and the performer. So everyone knew what the rules of the game were, and everyone knew what the minimum threshold for a qualified proposal was. And by doing that, before you ever ask people to engage, it sped up the process, and we saw the average time to contract drop dramatically, and the success rate of these prototypes getting through in the first process, and the government being able to select the qualified proposal that they wanted to go up dramatically. So that's something where, we realized and we adapted. And again, the OTA framework enables you to do that. The other thing we realized is a lot of times, projects and DoD gets a lot of criticism for not really having traceable, transparent processes, but also in performance, the numbers. And we realized that, look, there's a lot of OTs that are sort of run inside the government, and that's fine. But it's not just about getting through the process. The OTA is a contracting mechanism, which is a means to an end to get the acquisition done quickly. But the bulk of the work and the importance of delivering the capability of the warfighter is actually getting it done. And if you just leave some of these non-traditionals out by themselves when it's their first government contract and provide no ancillary services or support throughout the process, that's not necessarily going to get you a better result than a more traditional type of contracting. And so we have at NSTXL a whole set of ancillary support services where we manage the program on behalf of the government for the life cycle of the project. And when you have, in certain program offices in particular, a turnover sometimes every 2 years where folks rotate in and rotate out, when we have longer prototypes, it's not uncommon that the only entity that has been there from day one through the delivery of the mechanism at the government or at the performer level is NSTXL. And that maintaining that institutional knowledge throughout the program is something that we track, to where we collect more data than we're required to track about performance metrics, et cetera. And so not only are we proud to say that the financials and the performance metrics on the projects are audit ready for any project that we manage, we're also able to help respond to any congressional oversight inquiries within 24 hours with the exact data to the penny and to the day of where the project is. And that's the kind of, because of the milestone setups and because of the predictability of the OTA structure, that's the kind of benefit that you also get. Because obviously, as we've seen under the new administration, metrics matter. and the type of performance and the transparency of the process and where the money is going and how it's being spent and where we are. All of that matters now, and OTAs provide one of the most transparent, if not the most transparent structure, if managed appropriately, to provide that level of transparency and data that the government is increasingly demanding.
No, excellent stuff, Tim. And I mean, it's impressive because now we're not just talking about the OT is what made all this possible, but from what I'm hearing, it's more of a culture thing, right? You've got your suppliers, you've got your government, you got your relationships, and that's really the fuel behind the success. At least that's what I'm hearing. Over.
That's 100% correct. It's similar if you want to look on the private side of this. Whenever I hear new innovators or folks in Silicon Valley talk about how our goal is to disrupt whatever, they're on the wrong track, because disruption is an outcome. It's not a goal. Just like speed is an outcome, it's not a goal. It's all a function of process. And no mechanism is going to be effective unless you build the structures behind it. And Matt referenced this earlier. Almost every contracting officer, if not every single one, came up in a FAR culture. And that's the education that was received. And I think one of the continuing challenges is just getting the word out about OTAs and increasing the level of education and experience, because it's still not a very large part of the acquisition community within the Department of Defense or government broadly that is really fundamentally familiar with OTAs and has experience with them. And so to change the culture, we have to have people that are willing to kind of lean in, but then we also have to have good examples of where this has worked, and that understanding that, hey, we're not going to get it right every single time, but again, if we collect the data appropriately, if we have that culture of transparency and openness, and we really do treat it as a partnership, as we have with Crane and with our members, then that fosters an environment that is conducive to innovating the acquisition process. And with the executive order that came out on April 9th from President Trump that really highlighted OTAs as a fundamental pathway for acquisition reform that the new administration is hoping to get. I don't quote me on this, but I believe July 8th, the first part of that report is due, that highlights how OTAs are going to be utilized more effectively. It's incumbent upon us that manage the OTAs, folks like Matt that oversee the OTAs within government. We've got to be ready to absorb what will be an increased demand signal for the use of these. And we've got to help be part of the education and that cultural change, because if we can change the culture and sort of create that, then a lot of the issues, the gridlock issues that we hear about and that companies experience all the time with acquisition, those are, again, they're just process problems. There's nothing fundamentally blocking Department of Defense or the federal government from streamlining and creating more efficient acquisition pathways, but it does require all the parties to engage openly and honestly and willingly to figure out how to make all this work. Because in a lot of these, there's not a right or wrong party on these opinions. There's a process that we have to follow. At the end of the day, this is still government acquisition. There are rules of the game that will apply here that won't necessarily apply in the commercial space, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's just about making sure that the new culture we're establishing as a highlight and a focus on the things that really matter as far as fairness, competition, but also performance and quality. Because at the end of the day, we have to remember that these are technologies that are going to be delivered to and used by the warfighter. And we have to remember that there is a mission component to this that doesn't exist everywhere, that is fundamental to the success of everything we do. And it is not hyperbole to say that lives are literally on the line with a lot of the technologies we deliver. And so if everyone leans in on this, we have all the tools we need from Congress to solve this problem today. It just requires that willingness, and to your point, that culture shift that we're actively living and seeing under the SMARTS OTA and under the Space Enterprise Consortium OTA that we also manage for U.S. Space Force. We're seeing this on a day-to-day basis, and this is how we want to drive this fundamental change.
All right. Excellent stuff, Tim. Yeah. And again, in the next 5 to 10 years, OTAs, consortium contracting, that might be the new normal. I mean, with successes like the one you and Matt have described today, seems very, very possible. So excellent conversation. Hopefully we've given our readers, listeners some insights into OTAs, and even the consortium contracting might be a new concept to a lot of our listeners. So awesome stuff. Speed, flexibility, several benefits baked in. But I just like to reiterate, it's not the vehicle itself. It's that culture, I think, that you guys have both described that make the thing run. So awesome stuff. And I'd like to give each of you kind of your parting shot. Any other shout outs, any other drop the mic moment? Let's start off with Matt on this one. What do you got, Matt?
I really have enjoyed working with the NSTXL team and their membership, the performers, to come up with the appropriate processes to, that are tailor-made for a specific project. So, that's been a super creative outlet for me that I've really enjoyed. The advancements that I have already seen to date in my short time working the OTA has just been incredible. Be it in the microelectronics commons ecosystem that Tim mentioned earlier, or in the hypersonics missile technology area. I've seen advancements and been part of events that I'd never dreamed that I would be a part of. So it's been incredible.
All right. Yeah, let's go over to Tim, president and founder of NSTXL. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today. Really insightful. My goal was to get the industry and government perspective, and it sounds like you guys are absolutely lockstep on the SMARTS program and OTA. So that's awesome. Makes for an easy conversation. What would you like to leave our listeners with there, Tim?
I mean, I can't say it much better than Matt said it, but to return the thanks to the entire Crane and government teams. The innovations that we've been able to accomplish in OTAs is truly a partnership, and we couldn't have done it without them leaning in and being willing to sort of take the risk, because they're the ones that catch the brunt of the flack and criticism if anything doesn't go right. But I think we get it right, almost every time, if not every time. But they're the ones taking that first step, and they're the tip of the spear that actually get these changes made and create in this laboratory that we're working on to really innovate acquisition to really deliver on things that are massive projects of huge scale with complex integrated solutions that require multiple players. There isn't a better platform than an OTA, and there isn't a better team of government innovators than those that like Matt on this call that sit at Crane to figure out, how do we do this stuff? And how do we really move at that speed of business that we need to deal with these emerging threats? So really appreciate the time that you've given us here today to talk about this. Always willing to have any follow-up conversations. Hope this has been useful to listeners. I just want to thank my full team at NSTXL as well. They do a lot of the hard work, and they're really the engine that makes all this go. I get the benefit of coming on and talking about this and getting to hear the things directly, but it's really the team behind this that makes this whole engine run for us. So couldn't be more proud of them. So I'll leave it there.
All right. Excellent. Thank you both once again. I think that's a great way to close things out. On behalf of the Contracting Experience podcast, all of our listeners and subscribers, thank you both so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure having you. And a big thank you to all of our podcast listeners, followers, and subscribers. If you have any feedback, suggestions for topics, or future guests you would like to hear on the podcast, you can submit those via email to thecontractingexperience@gmail.com. As a reminder, you can subscribe to the Contracting Experience podcast from any of your podcast listening platforms. You can also now find us on Facebook as well as our YouTube channel. Be sure to like us, follow us, and subscribe to receive updates and automatic downloads so you don't miss a single episode. I'm your host, Rob Lorton from the AFMC Contracting Digital Division, and I hope you can join us again on our upcoming episodes. Until then, stay tuned and stay connected.